Today on The Rush, we have breaking stories, drama unfolding in Hollywood, and a courtroom twist you will not want to miss. Stay with me as we unpack how Blake Lively, Taylor Swift, and Justin Baldoni just shook the entire industry with revelations that no one saw coming. The story begins with a courtroom already tense as the judge made clear that the evidence being discussed would have massive implications for the way this case unfolds. Blake Lively entered the room with an air of confidence, but the whispers around the benches carried a different energy because behind the facade, the legal strategy was already starting to show. Cracks observers noticed the way her attorneys shuffled papers, exchanged looks, and whispered with urgency. It felt like the type of moment where everything is about to be tested, and one wrong move could send the entire house of cards tumbling down. The reason so many eyes were fixed on this case was not just because of the names involved, but because of the way Hollywood itself was being placed under a microscope. When you bring Taylor Swift into a courtroom indirectly through leaked text messages and place Justin Baldoni opposite Blake Lively, you are not only dealing with a legal fight, you are dealing with the reputation of stars, the trust of fans, and the way powerful narratives are shaped and spun for years. The entertainment world has thrived on carefully crafted images, publicists fighting tooth and nail to keep reputations clean and pristine. But the truth has a way of surfacing even when people least expect it. And in this case, the leaks could not have been more damaging. Taylor Swift has always been a figure whose words are dissected by millions. So when her private texts became the subject of legal debate, it transformed what could have been a standard defamation case into something much bigger. The tension in the courtroom was so thick that every gesture, every sigh, every raised eyebrow from the attorneys felt magnified. Reporters scrambled to note the reactions. Fans outside held up signs, some supporting Baldoni, some fiercely defending Lively, and some demanding that Swift be left out of the mess altogether. Hollywood thrives on division, but this was different. This was not just tabloids speculating. This was a judge deciding what the public had a right to know and what should remain sealed. Blake Lively's team fought desperately to keep those messages private, arguing that they were irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial. But the opposing attorneys countered with precision, pointing out that the very credibility of the claims rested on context. And without those texts, the jury would not get the full picture. Imagine sitting in that room, listening to legal jargon turned into high-stakes drama, every phrase dripping with consequence. The attorneys knew the media was watching every word they said. So while the arguments were about relevance and admissibility, the subtext was all about optics, public perception, and control of the narrative. Justin Baldoni sat calmly, though. Anyone could see the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had become both a litigant and a symbol for something larger in Hollywood: the struggle against manufactured stories and reputational warfare. His calm demeanor was not one of detachment, but of strategy. He knew that any sign of frustration would be twisted into a headline, and so he leaned back, listened carefully, and let his attorneys hammer the points. Blake Lively, however, found herself in a different position. Her every movement was scrutinized, and her history of carefully curating a pristine public image now worked against her because the courtroom is not a movie set. There are no retakes, no flattering lighting, no carefully edited scripts, only the raw truth of what can be proven or disproven. And the judge seemed determined to cut through the layers of performance. At the heart of this moment was Taylor Swift, not physically present, but undeniably central. Her name alone changed the energy of the room because Swift represents influence, power, and loyalty from millions of fans. If her words become evidence, they could tilt the balance of perception in ways no legal argument ever could. That is why the ruling on the admissibility of her texts carried stakes far beyond the courtroom. It was about trust. It was about authenticity. And it was about who gets to control the narrative in an industry built on storytelling. The legal battlefield became a stage, and the performances, though unintentional, revealed more about character than any role ever could. The crowd outside grew louder as news trickled through the halls. Fans debated on social media. Hashtags exploded, and within minutes, the entire world seemed to be weighing in on a case that only a few months ago might have seemed niche. Now it was global news because when celebrities collide in court, it is never just about the law. It is about culture. It is about identity. And it is about what we believe to be true. The attorneys on both sides dug deep into precedents, case law, and rules of evidence. But beneath the legalese, everyone knew what was at stake: reputations, careers, and perhaps even friendships. Because when private conversations spill into the public domain, relationships crumble, trust evaporates, And the image that once seemed unshakable begins to fracture in real time. Blake Lively tried to maintain composure, but witnesses could see the strain. She shifted in her seat, tightened her grip on the table, and occasionally shot glances at her attorneys as if begging them to turn the tide. But in that room, power belonged not to her, not to Baldoni, not even to the publicists outside spinning narratives. It belonged to the judge who, with every word, redefined the boundaries of privacy and publicity. And so as arguments continued, the world waited not just for a ruling, but for a revelation. Because once the decision was made, it would set a precedent and open a door that could not easily be closed for the fans outside. The details mattered less than the drama for the lawyers. Every word mattered, and for Hollywood itself, the case was a reminder that no amount of polish can shield someone when the truth fights to come out. The first signs that Lively's case was faltering came not from a dramatic outburst, but from subtle cracks in her team's arguments. The judge pressed them with pointed questions, asking why these texts should be excluded, what specific harm they posed, and whether the public interest outweighed those concerns. Her attorneys stumbled at times, unable to present clear answers, and the silence that followed those questions hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, Baldoni team grew stronger with each exchange. They had clarity, they had momentum, and they knew the tide was turning outside. Analysts and commentators began to weigh in, calling it a pivotal moment, saying that if the text came in, it could reshape not only the case, but the way Hollywood stars manage their private communications going forward. It became about more than Lively. It became about precedent, power, and privacy in the digital age. Imagine the conversations happening in agencies across Los Angeles, managers, publicists, and actors alike asking themselves how safe their messages really are. How quickly a private conversation could become evidence in a case they never expected to touch their lives. This case had become the cautionary tale the industry never wanted but could no longer ignore. And through it all, the human drama played out in real time. Lively's attempt to hold her image intact, Baldoni's effort to stand firm against allegations, and Swift's involuntary role as the figure whose words might tip the balance. This was not fiction. This was not a script. This was reality, and it was unfolding moment by moment with an audience of millions watching from afar, waiting for the next twist. The courtroom buzz had not settled, even as the lawyers shifted their notes and whispered to one another like chess players. Considering their next move, the judge leaned back, observing carefully every word uttered and every document presented, because, in a case like this, the smallest phrase, the tiniest admission could tip the scales one way or the other. Blake Lively sat composed in her seat, but anyone paying close attention could see the flicker in her eyes, the subtle tightening of her jaw. As each revelation landed like another stone on a pile, growing heavier by the minute, the gallery was filled with reporters, tapping away on laptops, sketching out drafts that would soon become headlines, blasting across the internet before the ink. On the transcripts could even dry, Justin Baldoni remained steady. His counsel, calm but deliberate, as though they had been anticipating each counter from the other side for weeks, maybe months. It was not simply about legal victory anymore, it was about reputation, survival, legacy. Because Hollywood has long been a place where perception matters as much as truth, if not more. The mention of leaked texts connected to Taylor Swift sent murmurs echoing down the benches. Because once a pop star of that magnitude is attached to court documents, the media frenzy grows tenfold. The speculation about loyalty, betrayal, and alliances quickly overtakes the dry procedural nature of litigation. People on social media were not talking about motions or evidence, they were dissecting every emoji. Every phrase, every nickname used between friends behind closed doors, and now exposed under fluorescent courthouse lights. Blake, who had carefully curated her public persona for over a decade, now faced the terrifying reality that carefully hidden fragments of her private life were becoming fodder for endless analysis by strangers across the globe. Dave, as the narrator, leaned into this drama, not just to recount the legal maneuvers, but to spotlight the cultural earthquake shaking Hollywood itself. Because when stars are entangled in courtroom battles, it reveals truths not only about them, but about the industry that shields and exploits them simultaneously. Blake's team argued vigorously that these texts were irrelevant, that the court should shield them, but the judge was unmoved, reminding everyone that relevance is not defined by celebrity preference, but by legal necessity. The word relevant echoed like a hammer in the minds of those listening, because in that one decision, the possibility of exposure multiplied. For Taylor Swift, for Blake Lively, for Justin Baldoni, for Ryan Reynolds, and beyond. Meanwhile, commentators outside the courthouse were already framing this as a watershed, Moment comparing it to prior scandals where hidden communications brought careers to a standstill. Some whispered about how similar it felt to the unraveling of other Hollywood icons when their secrets were dragged into daylight. The legal experts, watching from afar, analyzed each turn, breaking down the statutes and precedents. But the public hungered less for technicalities and more for the human story. The betrayals, the friendships, the hypocrisies. Dave highlighted the irony that while fans adored the glamorous lives portrayed on red carpets, the real stories behind the velvet ropes were filled with conflict, scheming, and strategic silence. Blake Lively, the fashion icon. The mother, the star, now confronted a battle she could not win. With charm or designer gowns, this was about records, receipts, sworn testimony, and whether the court believed she had crossed a line of defamation and manipulation. Justin Baldoni was not portrayed as a perfect figure either, but his strategy revealed patience, a willingness to withstand character assassination in order to let facts speak louder than curated headlines. And the contrast between the two was becoming clearer as proceedings unfolded. Even those once loyal to Blake began whispering doubts as new filings appeared outlining contradictions in her statements, pointing to inconsistencies that her attorneys struggled to explain away. Each time an objection was raised and overruled, the tide seemed to shift just a little more in favor of the defense. Outside cameras flashed endlessly, capturing blurred faces walking through courthouse doors. Fans lined sidewalks clutching signs, some supporting Taylor, some defending Blake, others just hoping to glimpse a piece of history in the making, because this trial was no longer just about two celebrities. It had become symbolic of Hollywood accountability, the notion that wealth and fame could not forever shield one from scrutiny. Dave spoke of this transformation in tone, marveling at how a defamation suit had snowballed into a cultural referendum touching issues of trust power and celebrity entitlement. Part 1 had set the stage, but now Part 2 underscored that this was only the beginning, that the deeper the court dug, the more tangled threads they would find. Threads linking not just the main players, but an entire web of Hollywood connections. Journalists, producers, former co-stars, even brands and charities that had aligned with these figures all risked being pulled into the undertow of scandal as the judge ordered certain documents. Unsealed gasps filled the chamber. Reporters rushed from the room to file breaking news. Updates, smartphones lit up with alerts across the world, and the weight of the moment pressed visibly on Blake's shoulders. Her attempt to maintain composure faltered briefly, her eyes darting toward her attorneys, her lips tightening in a way cameras quickly captured and would later analyze frame by frame on countless gossip shows. Dave reminded his audience that this was not simply spectacle, but a reflection of how narratives can unravel under pressure one day. Beloved the next, scrutinized, ridiculed, doubted, the fragile nature of celebrity was on full display. As Blake Lively confronted the very possibility that her once unassailable image was now irreversibly cracked, and Justin Baldoni, poised and unyielding, became the symbol of resistance to that old Hollywood machinery. And as we move deeper into this tangled web of Hollywood drama surrounding Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and of course the collateral impact on Taylor Swift and Ryan Reynolds, it becomes clearer that this story has so many layers that it almost feels like peeling back an onion. And every layer makes people cry a little more, but not from sympathy, rather from shock, disbelief, and in some cases outright anger, because the public is watching, and they feel as though they have front row seats to a train wreck that nobody can stop. And if you ask around, people will tell you that there is something uniquely compelling about watching someone who once seemed untouchable finally stumble, and that is what makes the case of Blake Lively so intriguing, because she was positioned as America's sweetheart, the girl who had the perfect marriage, the perfect image, the fairy tale life. Yet beneath the carefully constructed surface, we now see cracks, and those cracks are widening as testimony, filings, leaks, and rumors spill out into the open. What we have here is not just a legal battle, but also a cultural reckoning where people are starting to ask themselves how much of Hollywood is real and how much is staged for cameras. Now, one of the most shocking aspects is how quickly former allies have distanced themselves from Blake when the whispers started about her tactics in court. It was quiet, but then the documents revealed a little more, and journalists began to dig deeper, and suddenly names started being dropped. Insiders started coming forward. And before you know it, there were entire podcasts and think pieces devoted to analyzing whether Blake Lively manipulated situations or exaggerated claims. And when you add in the Taylor Swift connection, The scandal doubled in intensity because Swift has a massive loyal fan base that does not take kindly to seeing her dragged into someone else's legal mess. And these fans mobilize faster than any PR team could ever. Hope to, which means every revelation about texts, messages, or communications somehow connected to Swift becomes headline news. And once it is out there, you cannot take it back. Now people are asking why Blake would even allow her legal team to tread into those waters. Because it feels like playing with fire. If you bring Swift into it, you are not just fighting one person in court. You are fighting millions of online voices who are relentless, and they are already tearing apart every document. Every statement, every clip that surfaces, the ripple effects are enormous. And Justin Baldoni, who was initially painted as the antagonist in some corners, now suddenly looks more sympathetic, especially as more context comes to light. His strategy of patience, of allowing the facts to speak for themselves, is paying off because public opinion is shifting. And Hollywood insiders are quietly acknowledging that maybe he was wronged. Maybe he was unfairly attacked. And that kind of redemption arc is powerful in the court of public perception. And we all know that in Hollywood, perception is everything. So when you see major outlets start to adjust their coverage, when you notice that once friendly gossip sites stop spinning the narrative in favor of Blake, you know the tide is turning. People can feel it in the air. The collapse of a carefully curated brand is happening in real time. And it is both fascinating and tragic to watch because whether you like her or not, Blake Lively is a human being, and seeing someone unravel on such a public stage reminds us all how ruthless this industry can be. But at the same time, critics argue that she played a role in building this facade and in leveraging her connections for power. So, perhaps what we are witnessing is accountability long overdue. Now, what happens next is anyone's guess, but experts predict that the release of certain texts will be the breaking point. Those messages hold the weight of truth, or at least context, that cannot be spun away. Once they are public, the narrative shifts permanently. And if those texts show that Blake exaggerated, minimized, or misrepresented situations, it could destroy her credibility, not just in court, but in the industry. And that is a dangerous place to be because reputation is currency in Hollywood. Without it, the offers dry up. The invitations stop coming and the phone goes silent. And while Ryan Reynolds has tried to hold the line to protect the family brand, even he cannot. Fight the wave forever. There are already rumors that the strain is showing behind the scenes, whispers of tension cracks in the perfect couple image. And though none of that is confirmed, the speculation alone is damaging because fans and tabloids feed on uncertainty, and when you are in the middle of a scandal, the smallest rumor can snowball into a narrative you cannot control. The PR machine can only do so much before the public decides what the truth is. And right now, the truth people are seeing is messy, raw, and uncomfortable for Blake Lively. So as we continue down this road, one thing is clear. The story is far from over. In fact, it feels like it is only just beginning, and the most explosive revelations are still ahead as we close out today's deep dive into the whirlwind of Hollywood drama, legal battles, and the constant churn of public perception. It becomes crystal clear that these stories are about so much more than gossip and headlines. They are reflections of how power, influence, and image collide in the modern era. We have watched Blake Lively scramble to protect her reputation, Justin Baldoni stand firm as he navigates a storm of accusations, and Taylor Swift unexpectedly pulled into a firestorm she may never have asked to be part of. But her name and words carry enormous weight. The court battles are not just legal procedures. They are stages where the narratives of fame, loyalty, betrayal, and survival play out in real time for the world to consume. Every filing, every leaked message, and every headline is not only about the individuals involved, but also about how Hollywood as an institution deals with its own flaws, cracks, and secrets. We, the audience, are not just passive observers. We become part of the conversation with social media, fueling reactions and shaping outcomes faster than the courts can rule. What becomes obvious is that this is not going to end. Anytime soon, there will be more twists, more leaks, and more reckonings ahead. For those involved and for Hollywood itself as it struggles to maintain the illusion of glamour, while its darker truths are exposed, the story is far from over, and the fallout will ripple across careers, friendships, and public legacies long after. The final gavel has struck, and so as we end today, one thing is certain: we will be back here again watching the next chapter unfold together.